My parents once left me at a gas station 2 states away and said, "Let's see how long it takes him to crawl back." I watched their tail lights fade into the dark. 15 years later, I saw their names on a list I never expected. So yeah, I don't really know how to even start this without sounding insane. I've never really put this all into words before, but people on here tend to tell their wildest family stories. And this one feels like the kind that sits in the back of your throat for years until it either chokes you or you finally spit it out. I'm a 30M now, but this goes back to when I was 15. By then, I already knew my parents weren't like the parents my friends had. They weren't nurturing. They weren't warm. If anything, they treated me like some unwanted stray dog that got dragged into the house and then couldn't be kicked back out. There were years of cold dinners, silent treatments, getting called pathetic if I cried, or weak if I didn't push myself harder in sports or school. But the gas station thing? That was different. That was the night it clicked for me that they didn't just dislike me. They hated me. We were driving back from my uncle's place in Oklahoma. We lived in Missouri at the time, so it was about a 6-hour drive. I remember sitting in the back seat, trying not to breathe too loud because my dad had been in one of his moods. The kind where if the wrong song played on the radio, or if I shifted in my seat, he'd snap. My mom was quiet, like she always was when Dad simmered. It was close to midnight when we pulled off into this gas station in the middle of nowhere. Not a big, bright one either. The kind with one flickering light over the pumps and a little convenience store that smelled like burnt coffee when you opened the door. Dad told me to go inside and grab him a pack of cigarettes. I remember hesitating because he didn't smoke. Not really. Sometimes at family gatherings he'd light one up, but he never bought packs. Still, I knew better than to question him. So I went in. I dug the crumpled bill out of my pocket he'd handed me, walked up to the counter, bought the cigarettes, and came back out. And that's when I saw it. The taillights. At first, I thought maybe they'd just circled around to park somewhere else. But the car wasn't there. The parking lot was empty except for an old truck. I stood there holding that pack of cigarettes like an idiot, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. They left me. And not like some sitcom, "Oops, we forgot Kevin at the grocery store" type of thing. No, they planned it. I didn't realize it until a few minutes later, but the words my dad said before I walked in were basically his goodbye. He'd muttered, almost like to himself, but loud enough for me to hear, "Let's see how long it takes him to crawl back." I just stood there. My chest was so tight I couldn't breathe right. My throat burned, but I wouldn't cry. I knew if I cried, even to myself, it meant they won. It meant I was what they always said, weak, pathetic. The clerk inside asked me if I was okay when I walked back in. I remember my voice cracking when I said yeah. My parents were just messing with me. He didn't buy it. He gave me that look, the one adults give kids when they know something's wrong, but they're too scared to call it out. I stayed in that gas station for hours. The guy working the night shift let me sit behind the counter when a group of drunk guys came in around 2 a.m. I don't even remember his name, just his faded baseball cap and the way he poured me a cup of coffee even though I was 15. By the time the sun started coming up, I realized they weren't coming back. Not that night. Not the next day. Maybe not ever. I had no phone. No money besides the leftover change from the cigarettes. I didn't even know how to call anyone who'd help. And the worst part? I still kept waiting. Some part of me, the dumb, desperate part, thought any second I'd hear that old Chevy pull back into the lot, and my dad would roll down the window, laughing like it was all a joke. Like I was supposed to man up and prove I could handle it. But the parking lot stayed empty. Eventually, the clerk called the sheriff. That turned into Child Protective Services, which turned into a foster home, which turned into the rest of my life. And here's the thing. I never saw my parents again after that night. Not once. No letters, no phone calls, nothing. It was like they just erased me from existence. And I spent years convincing myself it was better that way, because I didn't have to live with the constant reminder that the people who were supposed to love me the most had just left me behind like trash. But then, 15 years later, their names showed up on a list I never in a million years expected to see. And that's where this story really begins. So yeah, I thought I'd buried them. Mentally at least. My parents were ghosts in my head. People I used to know who decided I wasn't worth raising. After the gas station night, my life went in a completely different direction. Foster homes, bouncing around schools, scraping by with whatever scraps of stability I could get. I learned how to be quiet, how to not take up space, how to earn people's tolerance just enough that I wouldn't get kicked out again. It wasn't all bad. I had a few decent foster families and one caseworker who actually cared about me. She's the reason I finished high school. But the idea of family became poisoned, like a word I couldn't say without feeling sick. Fast forward to me at 30. I'd managed to build a life. Nothing flashy, but mine. I worked as a mechanic, decent pay, small apartment, a couple buddies I'd grab beers with. For the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't defined by the way I started out. Then this list shows up. It was a Thursday, boring day, nothing special. I got home from work, cracked open a beer, flipped through my mail. Usual junk, bills, flyers, one of those glossy catalogs nobody asked for. And then an envelope from the county courthouse. I almost tossed it, thinking it was jury duty, but I opened it. Inside was a letter with a list of names attached. It was from the estate office. Apparently, a distant relative of mine had died without a will. They were trying to track down potential heirs, and they'd included this huge list of family members who were legally tied to the estate. I scanned it, not really expecting much. Then my eyes froze. Their names. My mom and dad. Both of them, sitting there in black ink, like ghosts pulled out of my past. I swear my stomach dropped into my shoes. I hadn't seen their names written anywhere in over a decade. For a second, it felt like I was 15 again, standing in that gas station parking lot with a pack of cigarettes in my hand, waiting for taillights that never came back. I couldn't stop staring. The list had addresses, too. Not detailed ones, just last known cities. And they weren't far. They'd been living maybe 2 states over this whole time. I laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny. More like that kind of laugh you let out when you're so angry your body doesn't know what else to do. They were out there, breathing, existing, living whatever life they thought they deserved. Meanwhile, I'd spent half my teenage years convincing myself I didn't need answers. But now the questions flooded back, and they were loud. Did they ever regret it? Did they tell people they only had one kid? Did they sit at some kitchen table every Christmas and pretend like I never existed? I shoved the letter into a drawer and tried to forget about it. But it was like poison. Every night when I got home, I'd find myself pulling it back out, scanning those names again, memorizing the cities. My hands would shake, my chest would tighten, and I'd feel like that abandoned kid all over again. One night, after a few too many drinks, I Googled them. I didn't think I'd find much, but there they were. Facebook profiles, half dead and barely used. An old LinkedIn page with my dad's name on it. And then photos. That hit harder than anything. My mom in a picture with some church group, smiling like the kind of sweet woman people trusted. My dad holding a barbecue spatula in a neighbor's backyard, grinning like he was just another normal guy. No one looking at those pictures would know what they did. No one would guess they'd once dumped their kid at a gas station like he was a piece of garbage. And that's when something shifted in me. I didn't want money from this estate thing. I didn't even want to reconnect. But for the first time in my life, I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know I'd survived, that I wasn't the broken, pathetic kid they'd abandoned, that I'd build a life without them, and I wasn't crawling back like my dad had sneered. I spent weeks going back and forth. Do I reach out? Do I leave it alone? Do I track them down, show up at their door, let them see what they threw away? Every option felt dangerous, but the anger wouldn't fade. Then something happened that made the decision for me. I got another letter from the courthouse, updating the estate case. It had more names listed. And this time, my parents' names had little marks next to them. The marks meant deceased. Both of them. Dead. Just like that, every fantasy of confronting them, every idea of finally screaming in their faces or watching the guilt hit their eyes, it all vanished. I'd never get that. I'd never get an apology, never get closure, never get a damn word out of either of them. But what I did get was the information about their deaths. Dates, locations, and, buried in the paperwork, contact info for whoever had been listed as their executor. Someone who'd been close enough to manage their affairs. Someone who knew them in the years I didn't. And that's when I realized, maybe I couldn't face my parents, but I could face the people they lied to. The people who thought they were good, normal, decent. And I could show them exactly who my parents really were. I didn't even know what I was hoping for at first. Closure? Revenge? Just answers? All I knew was I couldn't let it end with 2 little marks next to their names. They'd walked out of my life like I didn't exist, and now they'd exited this world without me getting a single word in. So I called the executor. It was a woman named Janet. Her number was scribbled at the bottom of the paperwork. I stared at it for a long time before I actually dialed. My hand was shaking so bad, I almost dropped the phone. When she picked up, her voice was warm, careful, the kind of tone people use when they've been fielding calls about death for weeks. I told her who I was. At first, she didn't understand. Then I said my parents' names, my mom and dad. There was this long pause, like she was sorting through a mental filing cabinet. Finally, she said, "Oh, you must be their son." My stomach turned at the way she said it, like she wasn't sure if it was true. "Yeah," I said, "their son, the one they left behind." I didn't mean to say it like that, but it slipped out raw, too fast to reel back in. Another silence. Then Janet cleared her throat and asked if I'd like to meet in person. We set it up for the following week at a little diner just outside her town. I drove 2 hours that morning with my chest tight the entire way, rehearsing conversations that never sounded right. When I walked into the diner, Janet stood up from a booth. She was in her 60s, tidy hair, kind eyes. She looked like someone's grandma. She shook my hand and said she was sorry for my loss. I almost laughed. Loss? Like I'd ever had them to lose. We sat down. She ordered coffee, I didn't. My stomach was too knotted. She started talking about my parents like she was describing a completely different couple than the ones I knew. "Your father was always helping neighbors fix things around the house," she said. "Your mother baked pies for every church fundraiser." I just stared at her. It felt like she was reading from some script. Perfect parents. Perfect people. I finally interrupted. "Did they ever tell you about me?" Her face shifted. She set her cup down slowly. "They mentioned a son. Once or twice. But it was always vague. I got the impression things ended badly." I barked out a laugh I didn't mean. "Ended badly? They abandoned me at a gas station when I was 15. Just left. Never looked back. That's how it ended." Janet's hand went to her chest. She looked horrified. I, I had no idea," she stammered. "They never." She shook her head like she couldn't compute it. And that's when I realized they'd lied. To everyone. They'd crafted this image of being kind, normal, salt-of-the-earth people, while their real story, the truth of what they'd done, was erased. I leaned in. My voice dropped low, tight with years of anger. "You think they were good people? They hated me. My whole childhood, they treated me like I was a burden. And then one night, they just left me. 2 states away. 15 years, and they never reached out. Not once." Janet's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Oh my God." Part of me wanted her reaction to feel satisfying. Like finally, someone knew the truth. But it didn't. It just made the weight heavier. She told me about their last years. How my dad had some health issues, heart problems. How my mom was his caretaker, devoted until the end. How the town saw them as this sweet older couple who kept to themselves, but never hesitated to pitch in when needed. Hearing it was surreal. Like listening to a bedtime story about strangers. My parents, the people who told me I was worthless, who left me in the dark, were remembered as saints. I asked Janet if there were photos. She pulled out her phone, scrolled, and slid it across the table. There they were. Gray hair, softer faces, standing side by side at a church picnic. My mom's arm looped through my dad's, smiling like life had been full and good. Something inside me cracked. I had to look away. Janet reached for my hand, hesitated, then pulled back. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I wish I'd known." I nodded, but I wasn't really hearing her. My mind was racing. Because it hit me in that moment. They died with their secret intact. To their friends, to their community, they were good people. And unless I said something, that's how they'd always be remembered. And for the first time, I didn't just feel anger. I felt this deep, gnawing urge for truth. To take their perfect little legacy and smash it wide open. I left the diner with Janet's voice following me, saying I should take time to process. But I wasn't thinking about processing. I was thinking about exposing them. And the question that kept echoing in my head wasn't if I'd do it. It was how. I drove home from that diner with the radio off because I couldn't stand any noise that might drown out the thudding in my chest. Janet's words kept looping. "I wish I'd known." Like some sick promise that if someone had known, things would have been different. As if knowing would have magically fixed 15 years of being invisible. I thought about all the little lies they'd fed the town. How easy it is to invent yourself when you never have to face a kid you hurt. They became the versions of themselves they wanted people to see. Church potluck mom, handyman dad. Real people, respectable. And me? I was the story you never told. The part of the puzzle you shoved under the couch and pretended didn't exist. The first night, I didn't sleep. I made a list. Call the foster caseworker who'd helped me at 16. Maybe she had records. Track down old school counselors. Look up news archives for any mentions of them. I wanted receipts. I wanted facts. Stories are powerful, sure, but paperwork is cold and precise and harder to deny. I started small. My phone felt heavier when I called my old caseworker, a woman named Tanya who used to sign birthday cards when other adults forgot mine. She picked up on the second ring and sounded tired but warm, same as always. When I asked if she remembered my case, there was a pause and then a sigh. Of course, she said. I thought about you the other day, actually. Hearing that felt like someone handing me a key. She told me what I already suspected. The abandonment was documented, but my parents had lied on official forms. They claimed a family emergency. They said they'd return. CPS followed up, made calls that went nowhere. There were notes about neglect, emotional abuse, a teacher who had tried to intervene. The file was thin in some places because paperwork gets lost and memories blur, but it confirmed the core. My parents had left me intentionally. After that, it all felt like permission. Permission to dig. Permission to be angrier than I'd allowed myself to be. I started pulling old court records, asking for public documents, even showing up at the school district office to read through faded files. Every paper I found stitched together the story I already knew in my bones. The more I gathered, the less like a bitter kid I felt and more like a person building a case. But building a case and destroying a reputation are two different beasts. There was this horrific, addictive thrill to the idea of posting everything online. Their smiling church photos with the caption, "Here's what they didn't tell you." Watching the tiny bubble of town respect pop like a soap film. Part of me wanted them to be exposed on Facebook with every neighbor's jaw on the floor. It's petty. It's ugly. But it felt righteous. Still, there's a line between righteous and cruel, and I kept tripping over it. I pictured an old neighbor wiping a tear, an elderly church lady who had brought casseroles over when my dad had chest pain. Would she be crushed? Would she feel betrayed? Maybe she deserved the truth. Maybe she didn't. I couldn't tell anymore which people were collateral and which were complicit. I drove back to my hometown on a gray Saturday with a folder of photocopies sitting on the passenger seat like a stack of explosives. The town looked the same. The diner with the chipped sign, the park with the crooked slide, the church with the steeple that always stuck out like someone trying to look taller. I pulled up outside my old high school and stared until a security guard gave me that watchful look. Old ghosts don't like being stared at by the people they ignored. I met with a woman who used to teach me, Mrs. Klein. She was smaller in person, with kinder eyes than I remembered. She'd signed an affidavit years ago when they were trying to determine guardianship. She told me how she remembered me as quiet, talented at drawing, always on the outside. She said she'd written to my parents, called them, begged them to come meet with the school. She'd been stonewalled. We did what we could, she told me. We had rules, paperwork. We couldn't take you in. Her voice cracked on the last part, and I could feel every year I'd banked into my chest. Talking to people was weird. Some reacted like I expected, shock, apology, regret. Others recoiled like I'd brought a contagion to their Christmas table. I kept hearing the same theme. We never knew. And yet, how do you not know your neighbor left their kid at a gas station? How many people can look away without complicitness slithering in? I kept thinking about the internet, about old posts, comments, photos with hundreds of likes. The town's version of them was public and polished, and I had the raw, ugly truth in my hands. I could write one post, a long thread with scanned documents and sworn statements. I could tag everyone, make sure the granddaughter of the woman who'd brought pies to my mother saw it. I could force them to reconcile the image with the truth. But then the more I dug, the more complicated it got. I learned about my dad's heart condition, the hospital stays, the way he'd shouted at me for being a kid who asked too many questions. I learned about my mom's small acts of kindness nobody saw. I learned that people have layers. Predators and saints can wear the same face. It didn't absolve them. It didn't make the gas station night anything less than a wound. But it made me pause. That pause turned into a new idea. Instead of a public takedown, what if I approached it like testimony? Not for revenge, but for truth. I could contact the local paper, hand over the files, tell my story in my words. Let the journalist ask the questions, corroborate, and present it as a story of child abandonment and the life that followed. It felt less like spectacle and more like accountability. The thought freaked me out. Because accountability is heavy. Accountability is legal language, interviews, subpoenas maybe, and newspapers that can twist quotes into headlines. Accountability might also lead to some old friends of my parents being humiliated. Or it might do nothing. Or it might finally make someone in that town look at themselves and admit what they'd ignored. I sat on the curb outside the church and breathed. My hands were sore from gripping the folder. I looked at my reflection in the diner window, a 30-year-old mechanic with oil under his nails and foster care scars that didn't show on paper. I thought about how many times I'd told myself to let it go. I thought about how many times I'd been invisible and chose invisibility to survive. But there's a point where survival becomes silence, and silence becomes permission. I wasn't ready to be silent anymore. Not if telling the truth meant someone else wouldn't get abandoned the way I had. Not if my story could pry open the lid on the small cruelties that hide behind casserole dishes and smiles. So I did the one thing that felt both terrifying and necessary. I wrote a draft email to a reporter at the county paper. I attached copies of the records I'd found. I wrote my story, the gas station, the pack of cigarettes, the way their tail lights disappeared. I didn't know if I'd send it. I didn't know if I'd press send and watch a life crumble or press delete and keep living with the quiet. But pressing send felt like hope. Not the sweet kind. The sharp kind that tastes like metal and coal. Hope that truth might actually matter. That draft email sat in my inbox for 2 days. Every time I opened my laptop, it glared back at me like a live wire, daring me to touch it. I'd reread it, tweak a word, delete a sentence, then put it back. It felt like holding a loaded gun with no idea if pulling the trigger would free me or ruin me. On the third night, I poured a drink and stared at it until my chest started to ache. Then I clicked send. I expected regret to crash down on me right away. But instead, it felt quiet, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for 15 years. The reporter emailed back the next morning. She wanted to talk. She said the documents I'd attached were compelling and that she believed there was a story here worth telling. She asked if I was willing to meet, to share more, to go on record with my name. That last part twisted in my gut. My name. Once it was attached, there was no hiding. People could Google me. People in town, people from work, people who never knew I'd been that kid in the gas station parking lot. But anonymity wasn't what I was after. I wanted the truth out in the open, with no shadows for my parents to hide in. So I said yes. We met at her office downtown. She had this sharp, no-nonsense vibe, the kind of woman who could cut through excuses like butter. She asked me to start from the beginning, and I told her everything. The neglect, the names they called me, the silence at dinner, the car ride, the cigarettes, the taillights disappearing. I told her about CPS, the foster homes, Tanya, Mrs. Klein. She took notes so fast her pen scratched across the paper like fire. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You know, this isn't just your story. It's a systemic story. It's about failure of responsibility, both from your parents and from the people who should have protected you." That word, systemic, stuck in my head. Because she was right. My parents had been the spark, but the fire had spread because other people looked away. Teachers, neighbors, officials, everyone who told themselves a story about a good family, while their kid was bleeding invisible. The article ran 2 weeks later. Headline: The Child Left Behind, a local family's hidden truth. My name was in the first line. My parents' names followed. The piece was brutal but honest. It laid out the records, the testimony, the night at the gas station. It pulled quotes from Janet, from Tanya, from Mrs. Klein. It didn't sensationalize, but it didn't soften either. And when it hit the town, it exploded. I got messages from strangers. Some were kind. People saying they were sorry, that they wished they'd known, that I was brave for speaking up. Others were cruel. People who told me I was tarnishing the memory of 2 good people, that I should have kept quiet, that digging up the past helps no one. One message stuck with me. It was from a guy who said he remembered me from high school. He admitted he'd noticed I was always alone, always quiet, and he never asked why. He said reading the article made him realize how much he'd looked away, and he regretted it. That one made me cry in a way I hadn't in years, because it wasn't pity, it was acknowledgement. The town split in two. Some people tore down the memory of my parents like wallpaper they'd realized was covering mold. Others clung tighter to the lie, defending them with, "But they baked pies, but they fixed fences. I realized people will always choose the version of reality that's easiest to live with. But me? I didn't care. For the first time, my story was bigger than my silence. I drove back to that gas station one night. The same kind of quiet stretch of highway, the same flickering light above the pumps. The building was renovated, brighter, cleaner. But I stood there in the lot and pictured 15-year-old me, clutching a pack of cigarettes, staring at the dark. I wanted to tell him something. Not, it gets better. Not, you'll be okay. That's too neat. Too clean. What I wanted to tell him was this. You won't be okay for a long time. You'll carry this weight longer than you should. But one day, you'll turn the story around. And when you do, they won't get the last word. I didn't get revenge in the way I'd fantasized about as a kid. There was no screaming in their faces, no moment where guilt shattered them into pieces. But I got something close. I got the truth out. I carved it into paper and pixels, into people's heads, into history. And for me, that was enough. Sometimes I still wonder if I should have just let them die saints in their neighbors' memories. But then I think about the kids still out there, the ones sitting alone at dinner tables, the ones standing in parking lots waiting for taillights that never return. Maybe my story helps someone notice. Maybe it forces someone to see. And maybe that's the real revenge. Not ruining their names, but refusing to let them erase mine.